The cake sat untouched on the dining table, 70 unlit candles forming a forest of wax. My children, all three of them, had arranged themselves around me like vultures circling prey. "Mom, we just want to be prepared," Luke said, leaning forward with that lawyer voice he used on clients. His wife Jennifer nodded eagerly beside him. "Prepared for what? My death? I'd been preparing for 70 years. "The will is pretty straightforward," Hannah added, tapping her manicured nails against her phone. "But there are some clarifications we thought might be helpful now, while you're still—" "Still what?" I asked, folding my hands on the tablecloth my mother had crocheted 40 years ago. "Still breathing?" The room fell silent. Even David, my youngest, who usually defended me, stared at the floor. I'd raised them in this house, taught them to ride bikes in the driveway, bandaged their knees when they fell. Now they couldn't wait to divide the spoils. "We just thought, since we're all here for once—" David trailed off. I stood up slowly, feeling each of my 70 years in my joints. "I think I'm a bit tired. Birthday excitement and all." They exchanged glances but didn't protest. I walked them to the door, accepted mechanical hugs, and watched their cars pull away before allowing my smile to drop. Inside, I went straight to my bedroom and pulled out the safe hidden behind my wedding portrait, the one Oliver and I had taken 35 years ago, before everything changed. I ran my fingers over his face, remembering how his smile had faded over the years, how his hands had changed from gentle to threatening. The combination, 1985, clicked into place. The year everything fell apart. Inside were property deeds, bank account details, and a sealed envelope I'd prepared 5 years ago after my breast cancer scare. It wasn't that I didn't love my children. It's that somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten to love me back. They'd grown up watching their father diminish me, chip away at my confidence, my independence. Even after I finally found the courage to leave him, they never understood why I broke up the family. They'd witnessed his cruelty but somehow blamed me for not enduring it longer. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I rarely used but knew by heart. "Eleanor, it's me, Vivian. Can we meet tomorrow?" Eleanor Parks was waiting for me at our usual spot in the community garden, her weathered hands cupping a mug of tea. At 65, she looked more vibrant than I'd ever been at 40. "Happy belated birthday," she said, sliding a small potted plant across the table. "African violet. Resilient little things." "Like us," I replied, touching a velvety purple petal. I'd met Eleanor 10 years ago, shortly after my divorce was finalized. She was running a shelter for women escaping domestic violence, a place I'd almost needed myself, decades earlier, before I chose to stay for the children. We'd bonded over shared experiences and the dream of creating something meaningful with our remaining years. "So," she said, studying my face, "what's wrong?" I told her about my birthday, about the disappointment that had been building for years, how my children had grown into adults who measured love in square footage and bank balances. "I think it's time," I said finally, "for the plan we talked about." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Are you sure? That house has been your home for 40 years. It stopped being a home when they started seeing it as an inheritance." The next morning, I met with my lawyer, a kind woman who didn't rush me as I signed the papers transferring ownership of my house to the Women's Shelter Foundation Eleanor had established. I'd keep lifetime residency rights, but after me, it would become transitional housing for women rebuilding their lives after abuse. Women like I had been, with nowhere to go. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt lighter than I had in years. I went straight to the safe when I got home, removed the most important documents, and taped my wedding photo to its door. Let them find it when they came looking. Let them see where it all began. That afternoon, I started turning my overgrown backyard into something new. I dug my hands into the soil, feeling the earth beneath my fingernails. I planted seeds in neat rows, marking each one with a small stake. Tomatoes, zucchini, sunflowers. Life that would continue growing long after the argument about who got what had faded. I was on my knees, patting soil around a raspberry bush, when my phone rang. It was Luke. "Mom?" he said, his voice tight with forced casualness. Jennifer and I were thinking of stopping by this weekend to help with some maintenance around the house. Check the gutters, that sort of thing. I smiled to myself. They'd never offered before. That's very thoughtful, but I've actually got plans this weekend. Plans? What kind of plans? I looked at the soil under my fingernails, the seeds waiting to be planted. I'm starting something new, Luke. Something important. What does that mean? His voice had an edge now. The same edge his father's used to have when I didn't respond the way he wanted. It means I'm planting a garden, I said simply, and I'm not sure when it will be done. I hung up before he could respond, turning my attention back to the earth. My heart was pounding, but not with fear, with anticipation. For the first time in decades, I was making choices without considering what everyone else wanted from me. As the sun began to set, I sat on my porch steps and looked at the freshly turned soil. Tomorrow, I would call the community center about starting a gardening program for elderly women. Women who, like these seeds, still had life to give if someone would just give them the chance to bloom. My phone pinged with a message from Hannah. Dad called. Says you're acting strange. Everything okay? I set the phone down without answering. Oliver, still trying to monitor me after all these years. Still reporting back to the children, forming alliances. What would happen when they discovered what I'd done? How would they react when they realized I'd given away their inheritance? The thought should have frightened me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. In the growing darkness, I could already imagine them. Women with stories like mine, finding sanctuary in these walls, planting new beginnings in this soil. Women learning that 70 wasn't too late to start over. Women blooming again. The morning after my decision, I woke with purpose. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone first thing. Didn't worry about which child needed what. Didn't wonder if today would be the day Oliver decided to call with some new criticism. Instead, I made myself a proper breakfast and sat at the kitchen table, planning. Eleanor arrived just after 9. Her pickup truck loaded with gardening supplies and a stack of flyers she'd designed overnight. Blooming again, a gardening circle for women over 60, I read aloud, smiling at the name we'd chosen years ago during one of our hypothetical conversations. You work fast. When you've spent decades helping women escape bad situations, you learn not to waste time, she replied, handing me a shovel. Now, where do we start? We spent the morning marking out garden beds in my backyard, plotting spaces for vegetables, flowers, and a small seating area where future participants could rest between tasks. As we worked, Eleanor filled me in on 5 women who had already expressed interest after she'd made some calls last night. There's Marge, who lost her husband last year and hasn't left her apartment since, she said, driving a stake into the ground. And Dottie, whose children moved her into that assisted living facility against her wishes. She used to have prize-winning roses. By noon, my yard had transformed from an overgrown patch of grass into the beginnings of something beautiful. We were taking a water break when my phone rang. Hannah's name flashed on the screen. Aren't you going to answer that? Eleanor asked. I shook my head. They've had 70 years of my undivided attention. They can wait a day or two. The call went to voicemail, but a text followed immediately. Mom, we're worried about you. Luke says you're acting strangely. Can we come over for dinner tonight? I showed Eleanor the message. They never ask to come for dinner unless they want something. What will you tell them? I considered for a moment. Nothing yet. The paperwork won't be finalized for another week. I'd rather have everything legally settled before the storm hits. I texted back, Not tonight, dear. I'm very busy with a new project. Why don't we plan for Sunday brunch instead? The response was immediate. What project? Dad said you've never been busy a day in your life. The words stung more than they should have. Oliver had always diminished my contributions. The years spent raising our children, maintaining our home, supporting his career. And now, even a decade after our divorce, his perspective was the one they adopted without question. Charming, Eleanor muttered, reading over my shoulder. I put the phone away without responding. Let's finish the east bed before the rain comes. By Friday, our little garden program had 5 confirmed participants, all women over 65, all with stories that echoed parts of my own. Women whose contributions had been minimized, whose dreams had been deferred, whose strength had been tested by loss or hardship or both. Dottie was the first to arrive, a tiny woman with a permanent stoop and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "My daughter says gardening is too strenuous at my age," she announced, pulling on work gloves, "which is why I told her I was going to bingo." We laughed and assigned her the herb garden, which she tackled with expertise born from decades of gardening. Soon, Marge arrived, then Rita, then Josephine and Bernadette. We worked side by side, trading stories and advice, planting seeds and laying mulch. "I haven't felt this useful in years," Marge confessed as we broke for lunch, her normally pale cheeks flushed with exertion and pleasure. "My kids think I'm just waiting around to die," Josephine added, passing the sandwiches Eleanor had brought. "My son actually said, 'Mom, at your age, you should be focusing on putting your affairs in order.' I'm 71, not 101. The conversation flowed easily after that. Stories of children who meant well but treated them like children themselves, of friends who had given up on new experiences, of the subtle ways society rendered them invisible once they passed a certain age. My husband controlled every aspect of our lives for 42 years, I found myself saying, surprising even myself with the admission. After he left me for his secretary, so cliché it's almost funny, my children acted like I didn't know how to function without him, like I was the one who'd been helpless all along. Dottie reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mine would hit me when he drank," she said quietly. "When he died, my daughter said, 'At least he provided for you,' as if that made up for everything else." One by one, the women shared pieces of their stories, the injustices large and small, the resilience they'd shown, the dreams they still harbored. By the time they left that afternoon, something had shifted. We weren't just starting a garden. We were reclaiming parts of ourselves long buried. Sunday arrived sunny and clear, perfect brunch weather. I'd spent Saturday baking muffins and preparing a fruit salad, setting the patio table with my good dishes. If this was to be one of my last peaceful meals with my children, I wanted it to be beautiful. They arrived together, which immediately put me on alert. They'd coordinated, which meant they'd been talking about me. "Mom, the yard looks different," Hannah said, eyeing the newly tilled beds and garden stakes. "I'm starting a gardening program," I replied, pouring coffee. "For older women in the community. At your age?" Luke frowned, exactly as I'd expected. "Shouldn't you be taking it easy?" David, at least, seemed genuinely curious. "What kind of program?" As I explained our plans for blooming again, I watched their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief. "But who's going to do the heavy work?" Hannah asked. "We are," I said simply. "We're perfectly capable." Luke cleared his throat. "Mom, about the house. Jennifer and I were thinking it might make sense for you to consider downsizing soon. That walk up to your bedroom is getting steep, and the maintenance on a place this size." "The house is fine, Luke," I interrupted. "And I have help now." "What kind of help?" The edge was back in his voice. "Friends, other women in the program." They exchanged glances again, that silent communication that excluded me. Hannah leaned forward. "Mom, Dad mentioned you've been acting differently since your birthday. He's concerned you might be making impulsive decisions." Of course Oliver was behind this. Even now he was pulling strings, positioning himself as the reasonable one, the concerned ex-husband. Never mind that he hadn't shown genuine concern during our entire marriage. "Your father lost the right to be concerned about my decisions a very long time ago," I said evenly. "He's still family," Luke insisted. "No, he isn't," I replied, my voice steadied despite the anger bubbling inside. "You three are my family. He's your father, but he's not my family anymore." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations. I could see it in their faces. The old resentment. The belief that I'd been the one to break up our perfect family. They'd never understood, or perhaps never wanted to understand, what their father had put me through. "I'm starting a new chapter," I said finally, standing to clear the plates. "And I'd love for you to be part of it. But with or without your approval, this is happening." "What exactly is this?" David asked, the only one who seemed to be really listening. I hesitated. The paperwork had been finalized Friday afternoon, sooner than expected. There was no legal reason to hold back now, but looking at their faces, I couldn't bring myself to tell them everything yet. Not when they were already viewing me through their father's lens. A garden, a community, a purpose, I said instead. Now, who wants more coffee? As I turned toward the kitchen, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A text from Eleanor. Channel 7 wants to do a human interest story on our program. They're coming Tuesday. Ready to go public? My heart raced. Once the local news covered our program and the donation of my house, there would be no more hiding, no more delaying the inevitable confrontation. My children would learn about my decision not from me, but from their neighbors, friends, co-workers. I looked back at them, these adults I'd raised, now strangers in so many ways. Should I tell them now? Prepare them? Or let them face the consequences of their indifference? I texted back one word. Yes. Tuesday morning arrived with a mix of excitement and dread churning in my stomach. The garden looked beautiful. Our 5 days of hard work had transformed my neglected backyard into neat rows of freshly planted vegetables, a colorful herb spiral, and flower beds that would soon burst with color. But it wasn't the garden that had my hands trembling as I applied lipstick for the first time in months. It was what would come after. You look fine, Eleanor assured me, adjusting the collar of my blouse. Like a woman who knows exactly what she's doing. I wished I felt as confident as she thought I looked. What if they ask why I donated the house? Then you tell them the truth, she said simply. No apologies. The truth. Such a complicated thing after decades of keeping quiet, of making excuses, of protecting others from the reality of my marriage. I'd spent 25 years with Oliver pretending his controlling behavior was just old-fashioned values, that his temper was just passion, that the bruises I sometimes wore were my own clumsiness. Even after I finally left, I'd never told my children the whole truth, hoping to spare them pain, to preserve some small portion of their relationship with their father. But where had that silence gotten me? The Channel 7 news van pulled into my driveway at precisely 10 o'clock. By then, all 5 of our regular participants had arrived, dressed in their gardening clothes but with carefully applied makeup and freshly styled hair. Women who understood the importance of appearances, even while doing dirty work. Melissa Roy, the reporter, was younger than I expected, with an earnest smile and sharp eyes. She shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Harper, I'm so excited about your story. A gardening program for senior women would be interesting enough. But when our researcher discovered you donated your home to become transitional housing for abuse survivors, well, that's the kind of story our viewers connect with. I swallowed hard. I'm happy to talk about the gardening program, but the house donation is complicated. She tilted her head, curiosity piqued. Family complications? You could say that, I admitted. Don't worry, she said, misunderstanding my concern. We'll be respectful. We won't air the segment until Thursday evening. Plenty of time to give your family a heads up if you haven't already. 2 days. I had 2 days to find the courage to tell my children what I'd done, or they'd learn about it while eating dinner in front of the television. The interview itself went smoothly. Melissa was professional and genuinely interested in our stories. She interviewed each woman in the group, capturing their hopes for the garden and what the program meant to them. When she came to me, her questions were gentle but probing. What inspired you to start this program, Mrs. Harper? I glanced at the other women, drawing strength from their encouraging nods. I turned 70 recently, and I realized I was waiting for permission to live my life fully. Permission from my children, from society, from myself. This garden is about reclaiming that power. And the house donation? That's quite a significant gift. I took a deep breath. After my divorce, I spent years rebuilding my life, my sense of self. But I had resources many women don't have: financial security, a home, family support. Too many women stay in dangerous situations because they have nowhere to go. If my house can become a safe haven, a place where women can heal and plan their next steps, well, that seems like the best inheritance I could possibly leave. Your children must be very proud of your generosity. The question I'd been dreading. I chose my words carefully. My children are still adjusting to seeing me as more than just their mother. It's a transition for all of us. The camera operator signaled that he'd gotten what he needed. Melissa thanked us and promised to let us know once the segment was scheduled. As the news van pulled away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and mounting anxiety. "Well," said Dottie, removing her gardening gloves, "that went better than my daughter's wedding." We all laughed, the tension breaking. For the next few hours, we lost ourselves in gardening tasks, our hands busy with weeding and mulching, our conversation light and comfortable. But as the others began to leave, the weight of what I needed to do settled back onto my shoulders. "Want me to stay?" Eleanor asked, the last to go. I shook my head. "This is something I need to do myself, but thank you." After she left, I showered and changed, then sat at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me. One by one, I texted my children. "We need to talk. Can you come over tomorrow evening? It's important." Hannah responded first. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" So quick to assume the worst. Not sick. Just need to discuss something important. 6 p.m. "Luke, is this about Dad? He said you're refusing to take his calls." I almost laughed. "Oliver, still inserting himself into every situation. This isn't about your father. 6 p.m. tomorrow. Please be here." David, my youngest, simply replied, "I'll be there, Mom." I set the phone down and walked through my house, the house that would soon help women rebuild their lives. Each room held memories, birthday parties and Christmas mornings, homework sessions at the dining table, bedtime stories read in soft lamplight. But mingled with those happy memories were darker ones. Arguments whispered so the children wouldn't hear, tears shed in bathroom privacy, the night I'd slept in the garden shed because Oliver had locked me out after a particularly bad fight. This house had been both sanctuary and prison. Now it would serve a higher purpose. Wednesday evening arrived too quickly, and not quickly enough. I'd prepared a simple dinner: lasagna, salad, garlic bread, comfort food from their childhood. Food that said I was still their mother, still cared for them, even as I prepared to disappoint them. They arrived together again, faces serious, clearly having discussed the meeting beforehand. Hannah had brought a folder of papers, which didn't surprise me. She'd always been the most practical one, the problem solver. "Mom," she began after minimal small talk, "we've been researching some assisted living options." I held up my hand. "That's not why I asked you here." "Then what's this about?" Luke asked, his lawyer face firmly in place. I took a deep breath. "I've made some decisions about my future, and I wanted you to hear them from me before you hear them elsewhere." David leaned forward, concern in his eyes. "What kind of decisions?" "I've donated the house to Eleanor's foundation," I said simply. "After I'm gone, it will become transitional housing for women escaping domestic violence." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah's mouth opened and closed without sound. Luke's face flushed deep red. Only David seemed more confused than angry. "What do you mean, donated?" Hannah finally managed. "Like, after you die?" "No," I said firmly. "The transfer of ownership is already complete. I have lifetime residency rights, so nothing changes for now. But the house is no longer mine to leave to you." Luke slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You can't do this. This is our family home, our inheritance." "Actually, I can," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "And I have." "This is absurd," Hannah said, her voice rising. "We need to call a lawyer. This has to be elder abuse or undue influence or something. Eleanor has obviously manipulated you." "Eleanor has been my friend for 10 years, I interrupted. "She supported me when I finally left your father after 25 years of emotional and sometimes physical abuse. She helped me find my voice again when I'd been silenced for decades. If anyone has been manipulating me, it's not Eleanor." Another stunned silence fell over the table. David spoke first, his voice quiet. "Dad abused you? Physically?" I looked at my youngest son, saw the confusion and pain in his eyes. "Yes, not often, but yes." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked. "Because you were children, and he was your father, and I wanted you to have a relationship with him that wasn't tainted by what happened between us," I explained, feeling a weight lifting as I finally spoke these truths aloud. "But that decision had consequences. You grew up seeing me as the one who broke up our family, not as someone who finally found the courage to save herself. "So this is punishment," Luke said bitterly, "for taking Dad's side." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "This is purpose. This is meaning. This is me, finally using what I have to help others like me. And there's something else you should know." I hesitated, knowing the next revelation would only fuel their anger. But there was no turning back now. Channel 7. News interviewed me today about the gardening program and the house donation. The segment airs tomorrow evening. Luke was the first to recover from the shock. "You went to the media before talking to us?" His voice trembled with barely controlled rage. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputations? To Dad's reputation?" I felt a surge of anger, hot and clarifying. "Your father's reputation has always been more important than my reality, hasn't it?" "That's not fair," Hannah interjected, though her voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. You didn't want to know." I corrected her gently. "There were signs. There were always signs." "Like what?" David asked, his food untouched. I sighed, memories flooding back. Like the way I flinched when he raised his voice, the way I stopped having opinions of my own, the bruises I blamed on clumsiness, the way I sent you to your grandparents that weekend when I had a fall that left my ribs too bruised to hug you. David's face paled. "I remember that weekend. I was 8. "You were," I confirmed. "And when you came home, your father had sent me flowers, and everything seemed fine. That was the pattern. Explosion, remorse, calm, tension, explosion, over and over again." "Why did you stay?" Hannah asked, her voice smaller now. "Because I loved him. Because I loved you. Because I thought I could fix it. Because I was afraid." I looked at each of their faces, these adults who had once been the center of my world. All the reasons women usually stay. Luke stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "This is insane. You can't just spring this on us and expect us to be okay with it. That house is worth over $500,000. "I know exactly what it's worth," I said quietly. "I've lived here for 40 years. "So you're just giving away our inheritance without even consulting us?" Hannah asked, her practical nature focusing on the financial aspects as always. "It was never your inheritance," I said firmly. "It was always my house, bought with the settlement money from my parents' accident. Your father's name wasn't even on the deed." This was news to them. I could see it in their shocked expressions. Another thing Oliver had misrepresented over the years, claiming he'd worked hard to provide this home for his family when, in truth, it had always been mine. "I don't understand why you're doing this now," Hannah said, frustration evident in her voice. "If Dad was so terrible, why wait until you're 70 to suddenly become an advocate for abused women?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times. Because for years after I left him, I was focused on survival, on rebuilding my life, I explained. And then, once I found stability, I fell into the trap of comfort. It took seeing the disappointment in your eyes on my birthday, the way you all looked at me as nothing more than a future inheritance, to wake me up. I reached for David's hand, the only one still close enough to touch. I realized I didn't want my legacy to be just a house you sell or money you spend. I wanted it to be something meaningful. David squeezed my hand, the first sign of understanding from any of them. "Does it have to be the whole house, though? Couldn't you just donate some money to Eleanor's foundation instead?" I shook my head. "The housing shortage for women fleeing abuse is critical. Eleanor turns away dozens of women each month because there's nowhere for them to go. This house can accommodate 3 families at once. That's 3 women who won't have to choose between homelessness and abuse." Luke stopped pacing and faced me, his lawyer mask firmly back in place. "We'll contest this. There are laws to protect families from this kind of impulsive decision." "It wasn't impulsive," I said calmly. "I've been considering it for years, and I was thoroughly evaluated by 2 separate mental health professionals before the transfer was approved, precisely to prevent such challenges." "You planned this that carefully?" Hannah sounded almost impressed despite herself. "I did," I confirmed, "because I knew exactly how you would react." The dinner ended soon after, with more heated words from Luke, tears from Hannah, and a troubled silence from David. They left together, a united front against their unreasonable mother. As I cleared the dishes, I noticed David had slipped back into the kitchen. "Have you ever told anyone else?" he asked quietly. "About Dad?" I set down the plate I was rinsing. "A therapist, after the divorce. Eleanor. And now you three." He nodded, processing this. "The segment airs tomorrow?" 6 o'clock news. Another nod. "I'll watch it." He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me briefly. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have seen it." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, emotionally drained, but strangely peaceful. The truth, after so many years, was finally out. Whatever happened next, I would face it without the weight of secrets. The next morning dawned clear and bright, at odds with the storm I knew was coming. I spent the day in the garden with the women, finding solace in the rhythm of physical work, in the camaraderie we'd built in such a short time. I told them about the confrontation with my children. My son didn't speak to me for 2 years after I sold the family cottage. Josephine shared as we weeded the tomato beds. Now he brings his kids to visit me every Sunday. They come around eventually. Or they don't, Dottie added bluntly. My oldest still thinks I should have stayed with his father, beatings and all. Some people never change their minds. By 5:30, the others had gone home to watch the broadcast. Eleanor stayed, setting up her laptop on my kitchen table so we could stream the local news. My phone had been silent all day. No calls or texts from my children. I wasn't sure if that was a good sign or bad. At precisely 6:23, after stories about road construction and a local school fundraiser, Melissa Roy's face appeared on the screen. In tonight's Community Heroes segment, we visit an extraordinary group of senior women who are proving it's never too late to make a difference, she began, her voice warm and professional. What followed was a beautifully edited 5-minute piece that captured the essence of our gardening program and the women involved. The camera lingered on our hands in the soil, on our faces as we spoke about finding purpose and community. When it came to the house donation, Melissa handled it with sensitivity, focusing on the impact it would have for survivors rather than the family drama behind it. Mrs. Harper's home will eventually provide safe housing for up to 3 families at a time, Melissa explained over footage of the house's exterior. A tremendous gift that will continue giving for generations. Then came my interview segment, the camera close on my face as I explained my motivation. After experiencing domestic abuse myself, my on-screen self said calmly, "I understand how critical safe housing is for women starting over. I was fortunate to have this home as a sanctuary. Now I want to extend that sanctuary to others." Eleanor squeezed my hand as the segment ended. "You did it. You told your truth on your terms." Before I could respond, my phone began buzzing with notifications. First came texts from the women in our group, sending congratulations and support. Then a message from David. "You were amazing, Mom. Call me tomorrow?" Nothing from Luke or Hannah yet. Not that I expected immediate acceptance. But there was another notification that made my breath catch. A voicemail from Oliver. My finger hovered over the play button. After all these years, all the silence and half-truths, I'd publicly labeled him an abuser. How would he respond? Eleanor watched me hesitate. "You don't have to listen to it now. Or ever." "No," I said, finding resolve in her steady gaze. "No more hiding." I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. Oliver's voice, older now but still so familiar, filled the kitchen. "Vivian," he began, his tone controlled but with an undercurrent of anger I recognized all too well. "I just saw your little performance on the news. I don't know what game you're playing, but I won't stand for these lies. I'm coming over tomorrow to straighten this out. You've gone too far this time." The message ended. Eleanor and I looked at each other, the implications clear. After decades of silence, the confrontation I'd always feared was finally coming. Not just with my children, but with Oliver himself. "You don't have to see him," Eleanor said immediately. "You don't owe him anything." But as the initial shock faded, I felt something unexpected. Not fear, but a calm certainty. I was 70 years old. I had survived him once. I had created something meaningful. I had told my truth to the world. "Actually," I said, reaching for my phone, "I think it's time Oliver and I had a long overdue conversation." I texted David, "Your father's coming over tomorrow. I think you and your siblings should be here too. It's time we all talked honestly." His reply came almost instantly. "What time? I'll be there." I barely slept that night, memories of Oliver's anger surfacing each time I closed my eyes. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute. Eleanor arrived early, insisting on staying despite my assurances that I would be fine. "I've spent 10 years helping women face their abusers in court," she reminded me, setting up coffee in my kitchen. "I'm not about to let you face yours alone." Dottie arrived next, her tiny frame deceptively fragile-looking as she settled herself firmly at my kitchen table. "My daughter saw the news," she explained. "Called me in tears, apologizing for never believing me about her father. Thought you might need some extra support today." One by one, the other women from our garden group arrived. Marge with her famous lemon bars, Rita with a fierce hug and whispered encouragement, Josephine and Bernadette arm in arm, bringing energy and determination into my kitchen. None had been invited. All had somehow known I would need them. "My daughter's a police officer," Bernadette mentioned casually, scrolling through her phone. "She'll be in the neighborhood all afternoon. Just in case." I looked around at these women, strangers just 2 weeks ago, now a fortress of support. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "All of you." David arrived at noon, alone but with news. "Hannah's coming," he said, helping himself to coffee. "She was up all night researching domestic abuse statistics. Luke's still on the fence, but Jennifer's working on him." I nodded, heartened that at least one of my other children was reconsidering her position. "And your father?" "Said he'd be here at 2. David studied my face. "Are you sure about this, Mom? We could call it off, get a restraining order instead." I shook my head. No more hiding, no more silence. At 1:30, Hannah arrived, her eyes red-rimmed but her posture determined. She hugged me awkwardly. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have asked more questions over the years." "We both should have," David added. At 10 minutes to 2, to everyone's surprise, Luke's car pulled into the driveway. He entered the kitchen warily, taking in the gathering of women with raised eyebrows. "Quite the welcoming committee," he commented, but without his usual edge. "Luke," I acknowledged, uncertain of his intentions. He shifted uncomfortably, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I found this in my old college boxes last night. It's a letter you wrote me when I left for law school." He handed it to me. I'd forgotten about it until all this came up. I unfolded the yellowed paper, recognizing my handwriting immediately. It was indeed a letter I'd written him 17 years ago, shortly after I'd finally left Oliver. A letter where I'd tried, in careful language, to explain that relationships should be built on respect, not fear, that love shouldn't hurt, that he should be a better man than his father had been. I'd forgotten writing it. Clearly, he had too, until now. "I didn't understand then," he said quietly. "I think I'm starting to now." Before I could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Oliver emerge, older, grayer, but still carrying himself with the same authoritative presence that had once dominated our home. My heart pounded, but I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. "Would you all mind giving us a moment before inviting him in?" I asked. "I'd like to speak to my children alone first." The garden women nodded understandingly, retreating to the backyard with promises to stay close. Eleanor squeezed my hand before following them. "Whatever happens," I told my children as the doorbell rang, "remember that this is about truth, not revenge. Your father isn't a monster. He's a man who made terrible choices and never faced consequences for them." David nodded. Hannah wiped a tear. And Luke, to my surprise, moved to stand beside me as I went to answer the door. The Oliver who stood on my porch was both familiar and strange. 72 now, his once imposing frame slightly stooped, his confident smile faltering when he saw our children behind me. "What's this?" he demanded. "I thought we were going to talk privately." "We have nothing private to discuss, Oliver," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "You can say whatever you came to say in front of our children." His face darkened, that old, dangerous expression I knew so well. "You've turned them against me with your lies." "No lies, Dad," David said quietly. Just truths Mom should have told us years ago. Oliver pushed past me into the house, his anger radiating in waves I could practically feel against my skin. Old instincts screamed at me to back down, to placate, to apologize. I forced myself to stand my ground. "You went on television and called me an abuser," he said, each word precise and controlled. "Do you have any idea what that's done to my reputation? My business partners are calling, my friends are asking questions. Is that why you're here?" I interrupted. "Because I embarrassed you? Not to deny what I said, but to complain about the consequences?" He blinked, thrown off script. "Of course I deny it. You're twisting things, Vivian. You always did. A few arguments. Maybe I raised my voice sometimes. That's not abuse." "You broke her rib, Dad," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember that weekend we went to Grandma's. I remember the flowers you sent after." Oliver's face flushed. "That was an accident." "Was it an accident when you pushed her down the stairs?" Luke asked. "When you took her car keys away for a month because she went to lunch with a colleague? When you controlled every penny she spent?" I stared at my son in amazement. "You remember all that?" Luke nodded, not taking his eyes off his father. "I've been up all night, thinking back, remembering things I didn't want to see." Oliver's anger shifted to something colder, more calculating. "So this is why you've done it," he said to me. "Turned my own children against me, donated the house out of spite." "No," I replied calmly. "I donated the house because it's mine to give. And because helping other women find safety and rebuild their lives is the most meaningful thing I can do with what I have left. I'll sue," he threatened. "I'll tell everyone you're senile, that you've been manipulated." "You won't win," Luke interrupted, his lawyer voice now directed at his father. "The paperwork is ironclad. I reviewed it this morning." Oliver looked from face to face, searching for an ally and finding none. His shoulders sagged slightly, the fight visibly draining from him. "So, that's it? After everything I've done for this family, you're all turning on me because of ancient history? This isn't about punishment, Oliver," I said gently. "It's about truth. For decades, I kept quiet to protect the children's relationship with you. That was my choice, and maybe it was the wrong one. But I'm done being silent." He stared at me. This man I'd once loved enough to endure years of pain. "You think you've won, don't you?" "This isn't about winning," I replied. "It's about finally living my life on my terms." At that moment, the back door opened, and my garden women filed in, positioning themselves strategically around the kitchen. Eleanor handed me a cup of tea as if this were a normal social call. "You must be Oliver," Dottie said, her small frame vibrating with barely contained contempt. "We've heard so much about you." Oliver looked at the semicircle of older women, their eyes hard and knowing, then back at me. Whatever he saw in my face, the absence of fear, perhaps, made him take a step back. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to my ears. "Actually, it is," I said with finality. "Goodbye, Oliver." After he left, the kitchen remained silent for a long moment before David let out a low whistle. "Well, that was 40 years overdue." Hannah laughed, a sound edged with both relief and lingering shock. "Is it wrong that part of me wanted to see Dottie take him on? I had my money on you, Dottie." "Smart girl," Dottie replied with a wink. As the tension gradually dissipated, my kitchen filled with conversation and laughter. Luke helped Eleanor make more coffee. Hannah and David shared childhood memories, re-examining them through this new lens of understanding. The garden women told stories of their own confrontations and victories. Later, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, I slipped outside to my garden, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. I knelt in the soft dirt, checking on the seedlings we'd planted just days ago. Already, tiny green shoots were pushing through the soil, fragile but persistent, reaching for the light. "Mom?" David's voice came from behind me. I turned to see all 3 of my children standing there, uncertainty on their faces. "We've been talking," Hannah began. "About the house," Luke added, "and the foundation." I braced myself, expecting one last attempt to change my mind. "We want to help," David said instead. "Hannah knows about grant writing. And Luke has legal contacts who could be useful for the women who'll eventually live here. And I thought maybe we could expand the garden, Hannah suggested. Make it bigger, grow enough to donate to food banks too. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw not the entitled adults who had gathered for my birthday, but the people they were capable of becoming. People who could understand the importance of legacy beyond material inheritance. I'd like that, I said simply. As we walked back to the house together, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The path ahead wouldn't be perfect or easy. There would be more difficult conversations, more adjustments, more growth needed from all of us. But for the first time, that path was truly mine to choose. In my garden, seeds were growing. In my kitchen, a community had formed. And in my heart, at 70 years old, I was finally, truly blooming again.